The flickering light of Asia, or the Assyrian nation and church. The Russian arms in Sadi Qamish. The Turks have been disastrously crushed there. The Persian contingents were ordered to return to their former centers. Unbeknown, however, to the Russians, a Turkish force of 12,000 men under Halil Beg had entered Persia from the direction of Kurdistan. This force was regarded as a part of the flower of the Turkish armies. It was swollen up to a total of 25,000 strong, with the additions from the Turkish tribes and from the Muslim volunteers of Urmia. Halil Beg encountered the Russians in Salamis. The latter's strength at the time did not exceed 2,500 men of the infantry, including a small equipment of the artillery. The encounter took place in early part of February 1915. After an all-day battle, the Russians were compelled to fall back a little, and then the stronger positions to make a stand till assistance would arrive. In the morning of the second day of the battle, the Russian force was strengthened to a total of 9,000 men. Halil Beg took the offense and his swollen army charged. It was cut down fearfully by the Russians' machine gun fire. The impression of the Russian victory over the Turks in the Battle of Kars nearly half a century before had remained very vivid in the mind of the succeeding generation. In that battle, it is said that when the Russians opened fire with their guns, the fleeing Kurds in the Turkish army ran yelling, "This is not war, it is the judgment day." Both the scene and the impression of the victory were repeated, perhaps with a greater slaughter, in the Battle of Salamis. Defeated, crushed, and almost annihilated, the Turkish general, with a small remnant of his extra-fine army, retreated across the mountains over which he had come and retired into oblivion. The beset Assyrians of Urmia knew that the clash between the Turks and the Russians were inevitable, but where and when the two contending armies would meet, they could not tell. Their American haven was entirely cut off from the outside world, and so far as the native Muslims were concerned, to elicit from them some news as to what was happening on the outside, it was of course entirely impossible. They possessed an amazing instinct of secrecy. The forebodings of the Assyrian refugees, however, were twofold. They feared both the success and the defeat of the Turkish arms, which the former possibility, all hope of deliverance would have to be given up, while the latter, revenge and retaliation, were regarded as certain items in the program of their misfortunes. The Russians moved on gradually, feeling their way cautiously as they advanced. They did not know the extent of their great victory. They still expected to encounter the Turks, but no Turks were to be found anywhere, save their wounded who had crowded the hospitals and who were left under the care of the Christian physicians. The Russians had retreated from Urmia on December 24, 1914, and they re-entered the city on May 2, 1915. The refugees were then set free like birds out of a cage. They were told to return to the site of their former villages and begin to rebuild their devastated homes the best they could. But what a change had taken place during those 5 months of the Russian absence. From this beautiful district, they had seen it when it bloomed like a garden. Now their eyes behold successive heaps of ashes. They had once seen the Christian homes as a monument of Christian civilization. They now looked upon them as the natural product of the Mohammedan barbarism. They had seen Christian people advancing in prosperity and excelling their former masters. They looked now upon a camp of dilapidated and emaciated refugees who were hardly able to stand on their feet. They had seen these Christian communities look like solitary oases dotting a wilderness of Islam's make. They were now led to see the fresh proofs of a superstitious Islam's curse. In fact, the sights witnessed by the Russian military authorities appeared to them so appalling, and the outrages perpetrated upon Christians looked so heinous that the Russian commanding general gave orders to a Siberian contingent which had arrived in Urmia to enter the city and put all the Muslims to the edge of the sword. He was prevented from carrying out his issued orders only by the reasoning of the intercession of the witnesses and the representatives of Christ's Christianity. The return of the Assyrians to their homes looked like the return of an army engaged in many battles. They now learned the full extent of their disaster. There were villages that had been entirely wiped off, and had absolutely no inhabitant left. There were families that had disappeared forever from their midst. Large towns had been reduced into little nests, while the family groups mournfully left the absence of 1/2 or 2/3 of their original number. In addition to this melancholy scene, there was the bloom of an abject poverty to which they had been reduced by the total loss of all their possessions. The ruins of the Christian homes of Urmia, courtesy near East Relief. With the return of the Russians, postal service to Urmia was resumed and the relief funds from America began to arrive at the most opportune moment. This was the month of May, in which it was not too late to plant, nor the season for the cultivation of the vineyards was entirely past. The poor received their rations, and the owners of the lands were lent money out of the relief funds to make a new beginning in the development of their properties. In some cases, those who had saved part of their furnishings placed their rugs as security. In others, promissory note IOU became sufficient. The Russian Orthodox bishop also informed Petrograd of the pitiable condition of the Assyrians. And the ever-sympathetic government poured rubles into Urmia for the aid of the Christians. With such assistance as they received for a start, the Assyrians commenced to erect some humble shelters, and undertook to pursue the shadow of their former industries. The Persian Assyrians had no longer any fear of anti-attack either by the neighboring Kurdish tribes or by the native Muslims, for their own mountain warriors had now arrived in the midst. They had entered Persia shortly after the Russian victory in the Battle of Sarikamish. Their former fears were indeed eliminated, even if the Russian strategy should necessitate another and a similar retreat of the Russian forces. The Nestorian mountaineers were more than able to cope with any eventualities that might arise, even if all of Azerbaijan was to venture to challenge their valor. In fact, their fame had already spread throughout Persia, and even the government of Persia entertained no small anxiety as to the future attitude of Marshimun's warriors. In case the Muslim fanatical element persisted in its previous course of mischief, when the staggering news of Marshimun's treacherous assassination, an account of which will be given in another chapter, reached America, the writer not knowing the entire situation then, in the name of humanity, reached America. The writer not knowing the entire situation then, in the name of humanity, and in the name of the Assyrian National Associations of America, and through the courtesy of the Persian legation in Washington, cabled to the Persian Shah and the Persian Prime Minister, imploring the Persian government to save its good name and intervene in rescuing the Assyrian Christians from extermination. The Persian Prime Minister, however, immediately replied, requesting the writer to use his influence in preventing the mountain Nestorians from exterminating the Muslims. But while the Assyrians rested perfectly immune from any fear of their Muslim neighbors, the uncertainty of the final outcome of the Great War, to them an ever-present shadow, giving rise to the surmisings of another dreadful flight, and keep them in the misery of an unsettled situation.